Celeste Martinez. When 70-year-old Stephen Beard Jr. encountered 32-year-old Celeste Martinez, it was love at first sight. Following a whirlwind romance, Celeste and her two daughters went from struggling to make ends meet to living a life of luxury, including first-class world travel, a million-dollar mansion, and access to every designer label imaginable. But everything changed 4 years later when Stephen was shot in his home. What followed was a tangled story of deceit, spurned lovers, and sorrow. Retired Fox broadcasting executive Stephen Beard Jr. had led a comfortable life. He resided in a million-dollar mansion, traveled first class, and spent his afternoons at an upscale country club in Austin, Texas. It was there, in 1995, that he met Celeste Martinez, a 32-year-old waitress who had been divorced 3 times and had 2 children, Christina and Jennifer, from her first marriage. A whirlwind romance quickly followed. Family and friends warned Stephen that the marriage was unlikely to last, partly due to their significant age difference and partly because they had nothing in common beyond his wealth. For Celeste, marrying a man of such means was transformative. Born February 13, 1963, in Culver City, California, she grew up in foster care. She later recalled meeting her birth mother briefly, only to be told, quote, "I am not your mother. I was just your incubator." The identities of her biological parents remain unknown. Her foster parents, Edwin and Nancy Johnson, were reportedly inadequate caregivers. Celeste claimed she had been sexually abused by Edwin while growing up and that she had attempted suicide at least once during her teenage years. At 17, she became pregnant and gave birth to twin girls, Jennifer and Christina. The father of the twins, Craig Bratcher, became her first husband. The marriage was troubled. Celeste described Bratcher as abusive. The couple eventually divorced, with Bratcher taking his own life in 1996. Over the ensuing decades, Celeste moved from state to state and married twice more, though she did not have additional children. In 1993, following her third failed marriage, she relocated to Texas and began working as a waitress. Her children would later recall a strained relationship with their mother. Before I continue, I want to remind you that only a small percentage of people who watch my videos are actually subscribed. So if you enjoy my content, consider subscribing. It's free, and you can always change your mind later. Now let's move on with the video. Claiming she frequently neglected them and was seldom affectionate. Stephen, in contrast, had been married for 42 years, but his wife had passed away just 2 weeks earlier from terminal brain cancer. Only a month after their first meeting, he invited the mother of 2 to move into his home with her daughters. Stephen's 3 adult children expressed concern over how rapidly the relationship was progressing. His daughter, Becky, remarked, "I wasn't happy about the relationship, but Dad was really happy." Conflict arose quickly between the couple. Merely months after their marriage, on February 18, 1995, Stephen's banker informed him that Celeste had been removing jewelry and silver that had belonged to his deceased wife from his safety deposit box. Upset by the news, Stephen began filing for divorce. A friend of his recalled, Stephen couldn't have his wife stealing from him. He was really sad about it. But Celeste managed to persuade Stephen to stay. The couple reconciled, and the divorce petition was withdrawn. For a time, things appeared stable again. Stephen legally adopted Christina and Jennifer when they were 17. Christina described her new stepfather as humorous, adding, quote, "I really got attached to him." For years, Celeste spent her husband's money freely. She purchased luxury vehicles and extravagant jewelry, occasionally spending between $15,000 and $30,000 in a single shopping trip. The marriage continued without further incident until 1999, when Celeste admitted herself to a psychiatric hospital in Austin due to suicidal thoughts. She had suffered from depression her entire life, with her children later recalling an incident in which she held a gun to her head during a particularly heated argument with her husband. When later questioned about the event, Celeste said, as far as disciplining them, I felt like I was going to be totally alone in this big house because he passed out every night. It was just too much and I was so upset about everything. I was so depressed. I just wanted to kill myself at that point." While in the treatment facility, Celeste met an individual who would profoundly affect her life, Tracy Tarleton, a bookstore manager and fellow patient who struggled with alcohol addiction. The precise nature of their relationship is unclear. Prosecutors and witnesses would later assert that the two were romantically involved, while Celeste's lawyer claimed that Tarleton was obsessed with her and that Celeste only wished to remain friends. Regardless, in the psychiatric facility, the two bonded over shared trauma, having both been raised in abusive households. They were both discharged in the summer of 1999 and continued to maintain contact, with Celeste even hosting a party for Tarleton at the mansion. Jennifer Beard would later state, "It was pretty obvious that Tarleton had feelings for Celeste." Celeste's children were not the only ones to notice the bond between the two women, with friends observing moments where Celeste would sit on Tarleton's lap or Tarleton would cuddle close to Celeste and whisper in her ear. On one occasion, Christina caught the pair kissing in Celeste's bed. Christina later informed Stephen about what she had witnessed, but her mother denied everything. Celeste later told Snaps Behind Bars, quote, "They never saw that, and I never kissed her." Despite her denials, Stephen harbored suspicions and prohibited Tarleton from visiting their Westlake Hills home. Then, on October 2, 1999, everything changed. At nearly 3:30 a.m., emergency dispatchers received a call from Stephen. "I need an ambulance, hurry," he said. "My guts just came out of my stomach." Emergency responders arrived quickly and found the 74-year-old alone in his bedroom, clutching a hole in his stomach. It was initially believed that his injury was linked to a recent surgery he had undergone, but this theory was soon dismissed. Celeste appeared shortly afterward, surprised to find her husband's bedroom crowded with medics. She typically slept in a separate wing of the mansion due to the noise from Stephen's CPAP machine and seemed unaware of the emergency. She accompanied her husband to the hospital. Back at the mansion, investigators discovered a key piece of evidence, a 20-gauge shotgun shell near the bed. Though authorities wished to question Stephen, Celeste reportedly hired a defense lawyer and refused to permit law enforcement to speak with either her or her husband. Meanwhile, Stephen survived the surgery despite massive internal injuries, but faced a long recovery. Police then turned their attention to Celeste's children, who quickly directed them toward Tracy Tarleton. Speaking with additional witnesses, investigators learned of Celeste and Tarleton's relationship and determined that questioning Tarleton was a logical starting point. They approached her to inform her of the shooting and questioned her in connection with the case. Inside her home, they discovered what they described as a shrine to Celeste, adorned with dozens of her photos. When asked about her firearms, Tarleton handed over a 20-gauge shotgun. Testing later confirmed it was the weapon used in the shooting. Soon after, Tarleton admitted to firing at Stephen, but refused to explain her motivation when pressed further. Months passed, and Stephen was released from the hospital, only to be readmitted a day later. Hospital staff determined he was suffering from an infection. He died shortly afterward on January 22, and the charges against Tarleton were elevated to murder. Celeste, meanwhile, returned to her previous lifestyle, spending money, attending parties, and behaving as though she had not just lost her husband. Jennifer observed, quote, "The way she acted wouldn't be a way a widow would act. I just remember her laughing a lot, kind of in a way that she was relieved he wasn't around anymore." Police also took note of her behavior. One sergeant who had responded to the shooting recalled, "I remember Celeste saying, 'This is perfect timing. We were supposed to go to Europe tomorrow.' I found that an odd thing for a wife to say after her husband had been shot." Moreover, Celeste told friends that she was feeling overwhelmed with grief and needed to check into a clinic, but instead she traveled to New Orleans for Mardi Gras and indulged in partying. Just 5 months after Stephen's death, she married a carpenter named Cole Johnson. Christina observed that her mother did not seem upset. Shortly after Celeste tied the knot for the 5th time, Tracy Tarleton finally agreed to cooperate with investigators in exchange for a 20-year prison sentence. She consented to fully testify against Celeste. Her change of heart reportedly came after she learned that Celeste had married someone else. Tarleton claimed that she had been romantically involved with the mother of two and was devastated to hear of the marriage, as it confirmed her fears that her relationship with Celeste had been a sham. She told police that she had shot Stephen because, according to Celeste, he was abusive and treated her so poorly that she had contemplated suicide. Travis County Sheriff Margot Frazier stated, "We spoke to a lot of people who knew them, and there was no indication that Stephen Beard was ever physically or mentally abusive toward Celeste or the twins." Celeste allegedly persuaded Tarleton to use her shotgun to shoot Stephen, even disabling the alarm system and leaving his bedroom door unlocked to grant easy access. Tarleton later told investigators, however, that she had not been responsible for his death, asserting that it was Celeste who had deliberately infected her husband's wounds to rid herself of him. Celeste would later deny this, stating, "That's just another one of their lies. He wasn't home long enough." Celeste was indicted for murder in March 2002 and entered a plea of not guilty. She maintained her innocence, denying any affair with Tarleton and claiming the bookstore manager was delusional and had fabricated the entire scenario. She stated that although Tarleton had developed romantic feelings toward her, their relationship had been strictly platonic, and she even accused Tarleton of sexual assault, with several witnesses confirming that Tarleton had attempted to kiss Celeste while she was passed out during her daughter's high school graduation in 1999. Prosecutors, however, later had Christina and Jennifer testify, corroborating that they had witnessed their mother and Tarleton willingly kissing. Responding to their accusations, Celeste told Snapped Behind Bars, quote, "It makes me sick. You always hear blood is thicker than water. Not in my case." The defense, meanwhile, painted the twins as money-hungry women testifying against their mother to gain access to Stephen's vast fortune. Christina reportedly stated, "I do not remember," when asked questions by the defense 298 times. Celeste said, quote, "When they found out that they weren't going to get any money till I died or went to prison, that's when they turned against me. My kids sold me to the state of Texas." Still, the twins also testified to the many horrifying things their mother had said about her husband, with Christina noting that Celeste made remarks like, "Why doesn't he just die already?" and that she had married Stephen for his money. She would also say that he disgusted her. The sisters claimed they had once seen Celeste break apart a sleeping pill and put it in his baked potato, suspecting that their mother was knocking Stephen out so she could visit Tarleton. Celeste was ultimately found guilty of capital murder and sentenced to life in prison. The jury reached their verdict in just 3 days. Jennifer noted that the trial had been the last time she saw her mother. Tarleton, meanwhile, was sentenced to 20 years but was paroled in 2011. Celeste will be eligible for parole in 2042 when she is 80 years old. Reflecting on her conviction, she said, quote, "I was devastated. It's not right that I'm spending the rest of my life in prison and there is no evidence against me. I just wish somebody could come forward and help me." It was not just the testimonies of Tarleton, Jennifer, and Christina that led to Celeste's conviction. One of the most incriminating pieces of evidence was a tape-recorded conversation between Celeste and Christina, in which Celeste admitted attempting to hire someone to kill Tarleton so she could not testify. Christina recalled her decision to start recording the calls, noting that her mother had been abusive and lashing out. "She was saying horrible stuff," Christina said. "So I just started taping our conversations when they would get out of hand." In the tapes, Celeste can be heard yelling at her children and crying hysterically. She continues to protest her innocence and is incarcerated at the Texas Department of Criminal Justice Lane Murray Unit in Gatesville. Moving on to the next case. Kathy Martin. Today, we'll examine the case of a young mother who was discovered in her home under mysterious circumstances. From the very beginning of the investigation, the police uncovered several unsettling and chilling clues. Detectives encountered numerous unexpected and strange turns, but eventually, they succeeded in solving the case. Kathy Martin was born on October 25, 1959, in Houston, Texas. She was raised in a loving family and shared a close bond with her sister. During high school, Kathy met a boy named Mike. A few years later, they got married. The couple settled in a peaceful suburb of Houston, and soon after their wedding, they welcomed a daughter. 3 years later, Kathy became pregnant again, and in early 1987, they had a son. At that point, Kathy was 27 years old. After the birth of her second child, she devoted all her time at home to caring for the children. Mike worked at a small sign factory owned by Kathy's father, and the family had sufficient income to support their kids. Kathy's parents also provided financial assistance, allowing her to focus entirely on raising the children. On March 3, 1987, Kathy was at home with her children as usual while Mike was at work. When his shift ended, he decided to meet up with some friends and went to a bar. Mike called his wife from a payphone, but she didn't answer. This was unusual since Kathy rarely had the chance to leave the house, even briefly. Mike tried calling several more times, but still received no reply. Concerned, he phoned their neighbor, Tim, asking him to check on Kathy. Tim went to their house and knocked on the door, but there was no response. Peering through the living room window, he noticed that the TV was on, so he continued knocking, yet no one answered. Tim began to fear that something might have happened to Kathy. Instead of returning home to call Mike or the police, he got into his car and drove around the area searching for patrol officers. After a few minutes, he spotted a police car, approached the officers, and explained the situation, requesting that they check on Kathy. When the police reached the house and received no response to their knock, they tried the door handle and discovered it was unlocked. Entering the home, they immediately found Kathy's daughter lying on the living room sofa. She was unconscious, bearing visible signs of trauma, but still alive. The officers promptly called for an ambulance and continued to search the remaining rooms. In the bedroom, they found the younger child in his crib, unharmed. But in another room, they encountered a horrifying scene. Kathy lay on the floor, covered in blood. She was naked, and the officers instantly concluded that she was deceased. Her hands were bound with a lamp cord. The paramedics transported Kathy's daughter to the hospital, while investigators began processing the crime scene. Shortly after, Kathy's father arrived at the house, but the police refrained from disclosing the full details of what had occurred. Instead, they asked him to go to the hospital to be with his granddaughter when she regained consciousness. He complied, and while waiting at the hospital, he learned about his daughter's death from a news broadcast on television. Meanwhile, Mike arrived at the house, and the police immediately noticed something unusual. In addition to the fact that he appeared quite late, there were several stains on his shirt that resembled blood. The officers asked him to hand over his clothes and answer a few questions. Meanwhile, investigators made several intriguing discoveries. First, they found numerous bloodstains in the bathroom, suggesting that the perpetrator had attempted to clean up the crime scene. This indicated that the attacker had remained inside the house for some time rather than leaving immediately after the murder. Second, forensic experts found no evidence of forced entry. All the windows and doors, except for the front door, were locked. This suggested that Kathy had either willingly allowed the attacker inside or that the person had a key. The police also noticed another peculiar detail. All of Kathy's clothes were neatly folded on the floor next to her body. This not only pointed to the likelihood of sexual assault, but also seemed strange, as the attacker had taken the time to fold her clothes so precisely. Detectives theorized that the assailant might have threatened to harm her children if she screamed or refused to obey his demands. She might have agreed to comply with whatever they said, only to be murdered afterward. Meanwhile, medical personnel were struggling to save Kathy's daughter's life. They determined that she had been severely beaten, most likely with bare hands. After several hours in the hospital, she slipped into a coma, and her chances of survival remained low. Medical examiners studied Kathy's body and concluded that she had sustained 16 stab wounds, primarily in the abdominal area. They also confirmed that she had been sexually assaulted and collected biological material from the perpetrator. However, at that time, DNA analysis was not yet commonly applied in forensic investigations, so the experts were unable to obtain a DNA profile from the semen. The most they could determine was the perpetrator's blood type, so the biological evidence was sent to a laboratory. From the earliest stages of the investigation, police began to focus their attention on the victim's husband. After noticing the suspicious stains on his shirt, they submitted his clothing for testing. Mike's behavior that evening also raised suspicion. After finishing work, he went out with friends. Instead of returning home himself when he could not reach his wife, he asked a neighbor to check on her. Detectives had encountered similar tactics before. Cases where a husband committed the murder and then created an alibi by going out with friends. He would then ask someone else to check on his wife to avoid being the one to find the body and to divert suspicion from himself. Mike's potential involvement could also explain the absence of forced entry. Investigators began examining whether he had the opportunity to commit the murder before meeting his friends. The detectives soon uncovered another detail. Mike had a criminal record. Shortly after finishing high school, he was arrested for selling drugs to an undercover officer. He was sentenced to 6 years in prison, but served only 2 before being released on parole. Some time later, he married Kathy. Despite this, however, the police still needed more evidence before they could charge him. They also began investigating the neighbor, Tim, whose behavior seemed suspicious. Instead of calling the police from his home, he drove around town searching for patrol officers. Detectives also inspected Tim's car and made an interesting discovery. They found suspicious stains on the floor mats that appeared to be blood, so the samples were sent to the lab for testing. Investigators started to question whether Mike and Tim might have committed the crime together, or if one of them had acted alone. Meanwhile, medical examiners completed their report and reached an intriguing conclusion. They determined that Kathy had died around 1 p.m., roughly 6 hours before her body was discovered. This meant detectives now had to determine where both suspects had been long before the evening and what they had done following the murder. Mike and Tim each claimed they were at work, so the police began verifying their alibis. Then, 2 days after the murder, they received a call from the hospital. Kathy's daughter had unexpectedly come out of her coma. Her life was no longer in danger, and investigators went to see her, hoping she could provide information about what had happened. However, they soon encountered a challenge. The girl, who was only 4 years old at the time, had almost completely lost her memory of that day. All she could recall was seeing a man with light-colored hair entering their home. Both her father and Tim had dark hair, but detectives were hesitant to dismiss them as suspects. They considered that the child's recollection might have been distorted because of the severe trauma she had experienced. They consulted psychologists and asked them to work with the girl in hopes that she might recall additional details about the perpetrator. Soon after, the detectives received another call from the lab, revealing yet another unexpected twist. The experts analyzed the evidence collected from both suspects and discovered that the stains on the neighbor's car mats were machine oil, while the stains on the husband's shirt turned out to be paint. But that was not all. Numerous co-workers of both Mike and Tim, who worked at different places, confirmed that each of them had been at their respective workplaces throughout the entire day and had not left until the evening. This meant that neither man had the opportunity to be at Kathy's house to commit the crime. Detectives then asked both men to take polygraph tests, and the results showed no signs of deception in either case. The police, who had been almost certain that at least one of the two initial suspects was involved, now found themselves back at the starting point. They began considering other possible suspects who knew the victim and could have easily entered her home. Detectives interviewed Kathy's relatives and friends, asking whom they believed might have committed the crime, and soon they uncovered something unexpected. Many of them, without hesitation, named the same individual, Greg. Greg was Kathy's brother-in-law. Her loved ones revealed that she had often complained about his behavior. According to Kathy, Greg openly flirted with her and had repeatedly tried to persuade her to engage in intimate relations with him. Kathy also mentioned that Greg frequently made inappropriate remarks about her stomach, and as we know, most of the stab wounds were located in that same area. The police also discovered that Greg regularly used illegal substances and had a criminal background. Detectives began to focus their attention on him and soon found their first potential lead. Forensic experts uncovered a fingerprint in Kathy's house that matched Greg's, as well as a strand of hair resembling his. However, there was one issue. Since Greg often visited Kathy and her husband, both the fingerprint and the hair could have been left behind prior to the murder. Kathy's parents, however, stated that they firmly believed he was the killer. Her mother also shared an important observation. While she was at the hospital with her granddaughter, Greg came to visit them late at night. As soon as the girl saw him, she looked at her grandmother, and judging by the expression on her face, she appeared extremely frightened. After Greg left, the grandmother asked whether he was the man who had come to their house, but the girl said she still could not remember. After learning all of this, the detectives summoned Greg for questioning. He denied any involvement in the murder, claiming that at the time he was with a friend who also had a lengthy criminal history. In the middle of the interrogation, Greg stated that he needed to go to the parking lot to pay for additional time in order to avoid receiving a ticket. However, the man never returned to the station. His wife, who was Kathy's sister, later recounted that on that day, Greg had dropped her off at work around 10:30 in the morning and picked her up at 2:30 p.m. This meant he had a 4-hour window that coincided with the time of the murder and gave him the opportunity to kill Kathy. But despite this, the police still lacked solid evidence to prove his guilt. As a last resort, they decided to test the semen sample collected from the victim's body, though at that time, forensic experts could only determine the blood type of its source. It also required a large sample, meaning that once the test was completed, little biological material would remain for any future analysis. Nevertheless, the detectives chose to proceed with the test, and the blood type of the sample's source from Kathy's body matched Greg's blood type. However, this result also didn't prove his guilt, so investigators couldn't arrest him. They continued to search for other evidence, but they couldn't prove Greg's involvement. Eventually, the case hit a dead end. Kathy's family was convinced that Greg was the killer, but they couldn't do anything about it. Shelley, Kathy's sister, refused to believe that her husband did it and continued to live with him. In the following years, detectives revisited the case from time to time, hoping to find any new leads. In 1998, 11 years after the murder, they requested DNA analysis on the remaining semen sample. However, they faced another setback. Experts could only extract a partial DNA profile, which, when compared to Greg's DNA sample, yielded inconclusive results. The analysis showed that Greg belonged to the 2% of the population who could match the partial profile. Unable to arrest him based on this result, detectives once again called Greg in for questioning, telling him that the semen from the victim's body matched his DNA. To their surprise, Greg changed his initial statement, claiming that he had a consensual relationship with Kathy and he indeed visited her on the day of the murder. But the man insisted that she was alive when he left. Detectives were obviously skeptical of Greg's sudden change in story. Such shifts are quite common in murder cases when suspects hear about DNA matches. Additionally, Kathy had complained about Greg's advances, feeling uncomfortable around him, so it was highly unlikely that she would have been in a secret relationship with him. But despite their suspicions, detectives knew they couldn't secure a conviction without a full DNA match. The local prosecutors reviewed the case and confirmed that obtaining a guilty verdict would be practically impossible, and the case once again went cold for several years. In 2002, detectives reopened the investigation and sought the help of forensic scientist Catherine Long, who was conducting groundbreaking DNA research at the time. She and her colleagues wanted to determine if genetic material from a perpetrator's hands remain on the victim's body after strangulation, and if it could be extracted for analysis. To test this, Catherine and her colleagues simulated strangulation by squeezing each other's necks, then took samples from their hands and the neck area. The results were quite intriguing. Even brief interaction left behind enough skin particles for DNA analysis. The detectives working on Kathy's case became interested in their experiment. Despite the fact that the victim had not been strangled, re-examining her body years later was also not possible. Instead, they began reviewing all available evidence to see if the perpetrator could have come into contact with any other items. Their attention soon turned to the lamp cord used to bind Kathy's hands. It was evident that only the killer could have tightened it, as the victim herself simply could not have done so. The detectives handed the cord over to Catherine, who, together with her colleagues, began examining it. They first noticed an important detail. The cord had been stored in a paper bag, which allowed air circulation and prevented moisture buildup that could have damaged biological evidence. The experts collected swabs from the entire length of the cord, including the sections that still contained traces of Kathy's blood. Upon analysis, they identified two distinct DNA profiles. The first belonged to the victim, which was expected, but the second profile matched Greg's DNA sample perfectly. This meant the detectives had finally obtained solid proof that Greg was the one who tied Kathy's hands and therefore was her killer. Shortly afterward, 15 years after the murder, the man was finally arrested. During interrogation, he refused to admit guilt, insisting instead that he had been romantically involved with Kathy. The detectives, of course, did not believe him and, armed with the DNA evidence, decided to take the case to court. While awaiting trial, Greg was held in prison. Some time later, the detectives received an intriguing phone call. His cellmate contacted them, claiming that Greg had confessed to him. According to the cellmate, Greg boasted in detail about assaulting and murdering his wife's sister. He said that on the day of the incident, he had taken illegal substances and gone to Kathy's house. Once inside, he tried to force her into an intimate encounter, but she resisted and demanded that he leave. Greg then turned to her daughter and struck her multiple times with great force. Afterward, he threatened Kathy, saying that if she refused to do what he wanted, he would kill her son. Kathy, having no other option, agreed in order to protect her children. Greg tied her up, assaulted her, and then killed her by inflicting numerous stab wounds. He later washed the blood off in the bathroom and changed into her husband's clothes to avoid getting blood on his own while leaving. The detectives had no doubt about the accuracy of the cellmate's statements, as there was no way he could have known so many critical details, even if he had followed news coverage of the case. Armed with the cellmate's testimony, the detectives confronted Greg, and this time he finally confessed. He admitted to killing Kathy and repeated everything he had told his cellmate. In 2004, he pleaded guilty before a judge and was sentenced to 45 years in prison. However, he served only 4 years before dying of liver cancer at the age of 56. Kathy's husband, Mike, did not live to see the killer's arrest. He passed away at the age of 45. Kathy's children and parents expressed their gratitude to the detectives for finally bringing the case to a close, even though it had taken 15 years. During all that time, they had been almost certain that Greg was the murderer and had been forced to watch him continue living with their second daughter, unable to do anything about it. Moving on to the next case. Melissa Wolfenbarger. A young mother planned to visit her parents for Christmas, but she never arrived. Just before the holiday, she stopped communicating and vanished without a trace. Her parents began searching for their daughter, uncovering strange and frightening clues along the way. Soon, detectives encountered an unexpected twist that shocked everyone involved in the case, as none of them had ever seen anything like it before. In the end, this extraordinary twist pushed the investigation forward and helped them uncover the truth. Melissa Wolfenbarger was born on September 9, 1977, in the small American town of Locust Grove, Georgia. She was the youngest child in her family, and her older sister, who was 7 years old when Melissa was born, helped their mother take care of her from the very beginning. As they grew older, the sisters developed a very close bond. In high school, Melissa met a young man named Christopher, and soon after graduating, they got married. The couple settled in a quiet suburb of Atlanta, where Christopher found a job at a glass manufacturing plant. Not long after moving, Melissa became pregnant, and the couple welcomed a daughter, followed later by a son. By 1998, 21-year-old Melissa spent most of her time at home caring for her children. Although she was quite young, she was happy with her growing family. Melissa also tried to visit her parents and sister as often as she could, but because of the distance and her many responsibilities, those visits were rare. They planned to spend Christmas with her family that year, and a month earlier, on Thanksgiving, Melissa had called her mother with a special request. She wanted an old photograph of her grandfather. Her mother went through all the family albums, found the perfect picture, and began eagerly waiting for her daughter and grandchildren to arrive. But when Christmas came, Melissa never showed up. At first, her parents were somewhat surprised, as they had been planning this visit for over a month, but they assumed she might have just been too busy. After all, she had 2 small children to take care of and had recently started working at a cafe because Christopher's income alone wasn't enough to support the family. The situation was further complicated by the fact that they couldn't simply call Melissa to ask why she hadn't come. There was no telephone in her house, and back then, cell phones weren't common. Melissa usually called them from her in-laws' home, but since her last call on Thanksgiving, she hadn't been in touch at all. Her parents decided to wait a bit longer. However, when Melissa didn't call on her mother's birthday, they began to fear that something might be wrong. That was when they decided to drive to Atlanta to check on her. When they arrived, they were met with a shocking discovery. Melissa and Christopher's house was completely empty. After speaking with the neighbors, they learned that the family had moved out right after Christmas, but no one knew where they had gone. This only left her parents even more confused. They couldn't comprehend how Melissa could have just moved somewhere else without telling them. Eventually, they got in touch with Christopher's parents, and through them, finally managed to reach Christopher himself. However, the situation became even more baffling. He claimed that Melissa had left him back in December and that he hadn't seen her since. According to him, she had decided to move to California to start a new life, leaving him and their children behind. Melissa's parents found Christopher's story extremely difficult to believe. First of all, they couldn't imagine Melissa abandoning her children, who were only 1 and 2 years old. Moreover, if she had truly decided to move, they were certain she would have called or visited at some point, but that never happened. Despite their doubts, Christopher stuck firmly to his story, and Melissa's parents couldn't get any additional information out of him. They returned home uncertain about what to do next, but determined to find their daughter. Over the next few months, they tried to locate her by contacting friends and relatives, but it was as if Melissa had completely vanished into thin air. In the spring of 1999, Melissa's mother came across a news report about the Atlanta police discovering a human head in a bag soaked in bleach in a wooded area. A few days later, authorities found 4 more bags containing other body parts. What immediately caught her attention was that the site was close to Christopher's former workplace, and she feared that the remains might belong to her daughter. However, police later confirmed that the head belonged to a missing man from another cold case. By early 2000, Melissa's parents finally decided to involve law enforcement, but that didn't accomplish much. Investigators spoke with Christopher and concluded that Melissa had most likely left her family to begin a new life, which explained why she hadn't contacted anyone. As a result, police did not pursue the case further, but Melissa's parents refused to accept that she had simply walked away from her old life. In fact, with every passing month, they grew increasingly convinced that something terrible had happened to her and suspected that Christopher was somehow involved. Her parents knew that the couple had been having serious marital problems. Christopher had physically abused Melissa several times, prompting her to leave him and stay with her parents, bringing the children along. But each time, he would apologize and persuade her to come back. This fact made Christopher's story seem even more suspicious. If he had always tried so hard to win her back before, why had he done nothing this time? He hadn't called her parents, hadn't gone to the police, and hadn't made any effort to stop her from leaving. Another strange detail was that, according to Christopher, Melissa hadn't taken anything with her. No clothes, no jewelry, not even her documents. The entire situation seemed incredibly strange, but without support from the police, Melissa's parents felt powerless to do anything about it. For the next several years, there was still no trace of Melissa, but in 2003, everything changed in the most shocking way imaginable. Police were investigating the 1977 murder of a woman. The case had been cold for 26 years, but had recently been reopened. After reviewing the evidence and conducting DNA testing, detectives identified the killer. It turned out to be Carl Patton, Melissa's father. But that was only the beginning. Once police arrested him, Carl offered them a deal. He agreed to confess to 3 additional murders in exchange for full immunity for his wife, who had assisted him in the killings. As part of the arrangement, Melissa's mother also agreed to testify against her husband, and she was ultimately granted immunity. According to their confessions, in December 1977, a woman named Mary, who was close to Carl, offered him $15,000 to kill her husband. The reason was that her husband had been cheating on her. Moreover, Mary had taken out a life insurance policy on him and wanted to cash it in. Carl agreed and brought along a friend to help carry out the murder. However, when they approached the man, his lover happened to be with him, so they decided to kill her as well. They dumped the woman's body in a river and left the man's body in his car on train tracks, hoping to make it look like an accident. A month later, Carl told his wife that his partner had apparently bragged about the crime to his girlfriend, and now he wanted to take care of them too. Carl invited the couple to his home, killed them, and with his wife's help disposed of the bodies by throwing them into a river. She also helped him clean the crime scene and the van they had used to transport the bodies. Later, Carl admitted to a 5th murder that had occurred 5 years before the others. Once again, it was Mary who had offered him money, this time to kill her first husband, and Carl agreed. As a result, Carl was charged with 5 murders, and police immediately suspected him in Melissa's disappearance. However, Carl insisted that he would never harm his daughter and had nothing to do with her case. Upon further investigation, detectives concluded that Carl was likely telling the truth. Initially, they had suspected him of only 1 murder, but he had voluntarily confessed to 4 additional ones. Carl claimed that he deeply regretted his actions, and it was this remorse that compelled him to confess. But that wasn't all. Seizing the opportunity, Carl decided to ask for a favor. He requested a meeting with the lead detective who had connected him to the murder and said, "You managed to catch me, so maybe you can find my daughter." The detective was intrigued by the situation. Here was a man who had committed 5 murders, now asking him to investigate his daughter's disappearance. It was, to say the least, an unusual situation, and the detective agreed to look into it. He began reviewing the limited information available about Melissa's disappearance and quickly noticed one specific detail. Those bags of human remains found near Christopher's workplace 4 years earlier. At the time, police had assumed the remains belonged to a man, but the detective discovered that this assumption wasn't based on any forensic evidence. It had simply been a guess. Since the remains were in an advanced state of decomposition, he decided to have them re-examined and ordered a DNA test, as Carl's DNA was already on file. The results confirmed his suspicion. The remains did not belong to a man, but to Melissa. Following this breakthrough, police finally determined that Melissa had been dead for several years, not missing, and her case was officially reclassified as a homicide. According to the medical examiner's report, the victim's body had been dismembered using a reciprocating electric saw. Melissa's torso was never found, which was particularly strange. Police conducted multiple searches in the wooded area where the other remains were discovered, but still couldn't locate it. Despite this, investigators uncovered one significant lead. They began taking a closer look at Christopher and interviewed his former employer at the glass factory, where he had worked until Melissa's disappearance. It turned out that Christopher had been fired around that same time for allegedly stealing an electric saw identical to the one used to dismember Melissa's body. Melissa's mother also informed police that Christopher had a history of physically abusing her daughter. On top of that, he had a criminal record. Another suspicious detail was that Christopher had changed his name almost immediately after Melissa's death, with no clear reason for doing so. All of this made Christopher the prime suspect in her murder, but the police had no hard evidence against him. They interviewed him multiple times, but he stuck to his original story. Although he frequently changed certain details, during one conversation, Christopher claimed Melissa had a lover and ran away with him. Later, he stated that she wanted to sell fake IDs, which explained why she hadn't contacted anyone. The police also uncovered another interesting fact. Shortly after moving from their house, Christopher left his children to live with his parents and hardly ever played a role in their lives since then. He visited them sometimes, but the children didn't even understand that he was their father. But unfortunately, none of this brought the investigators closer to an arrest because they needed some solid evidence. They obtained a warrant to search the house where Melissa had lived at the time of her death. Given that the killer had used an electric saw, detectives believed the murder likely took place in that house, and they hoped to find blood traces or other evidence. Forensic experts meticulously examined every inch of the house, taking samples from the floor and other surfaces. Unfortunately, their analysis yielded no results. The forensic technology of the time was far less advanced than it is today, leaving the detectives with no choice but to store the collected materials in the evidence warehouse, hoping that one day they might prove useful. The detectives made several more attempts to find new leads and get Christopher to talk, but each effort came up empty. The case eventually went cold again for many years. Meanwhile, Melissa's father was convicted and sentenced to 5 life terms plus 20 years in prison. It's worth noting that Mary, the woman who had paid him for 2 of the murders, had passed away in the late 80s, so she never faced any punishment for her role. Melissa's mother and her older sister continued trying to push the investigation forward on their own. They worked to keep the case in the media spotlight and stayed in regular contact with the detectives, but their efforts didn't yield any progress. This continued until 2017, and Melissa's mother never gave up hope of finding justice for her daughter. That year, she decided to attend an event where true crime enthusiasts gathered to discuss cold cases and search for new leads. One of the attendees was a crime analyst named Cheryl McCullum, and Melissa's mother decided to ask her for help. She shared the story of her daughter's disappearance and added something that immediately caught Cheryl off guard. The woman said, "My husband committed 5 murders, and I helped him." Cheryl became intrigued by the case, and after the event she began to dig into it thoroughly. She spoke with Melissa's family and even kept in contact with her father, who was serving time in prison. What struck Cheryl the most was how a man who had committed 5 murders seemed more concerned that his daughter's murder would never be solved. Over the next few years, Cheryl collected all the available information on the case and came to the conclusion that the most obvious suspect was Melissa's husband, Christopher. Although there was no direct evidence against him, the overwhelming amount of circumstantial evidence left little doubt. He had a history of domestic violence against Melissa, made no effort to find her after she disappeared, and simply moved on with his life as if nothing had happened. But the most incriminating detail was the fact that shortly before Melissa's death, Christopher had been accused by his employer of stealing the exact type of saw used to dismember her body. No one in Melissa's family doubted Christopher's guilt, including her children. By the time Cheryl became interested in the case, they had grown up and also tried to help resolve it. Cheryl also consulted some prominent figures in the true crime community, including journalist Nancy Grace and several law enforcement officials. After reviewing all the materials she had gathered, they all agreed. Christopher was the most likely suspect. Despite this, there wasn't a single undeniable piece of evidence against him, and the case remained at a standstill. At that point, Nancy Grace suggested that Cheryl start her own podcast to draw more attention to the case. Publicity can often become a crucial factor in unsolved cases. It might attract new witnesses who might not realize the significance of the information they hold, potentially changing the course of the investigation. Eventually, Cheryl decided to launch the podcast, and in 2023, she released the first episode about Melissa's case. Since then, she has recorded numerous episodes featuring the victim's mother and other relatives. Cheryl presented all the information she had gathered over the years, yet there was still no progress in the case. This continued until April 2024, when the long-awaited breakthrough in the case finally happened. After she published another episode, a witness reached out to Cheryl, stating that he had stumbled upon the podcast and might have valuable information. This individual shared that just before Melissa's disappearance, he witnessed a serious argument between her and Christopher. The details of his account remain undisclosed, as the events occurred only a few months earlier, and detectives chose not to reveal this information to protect the integrity of the investigation. According to certain sources, it appears that during this argument, Christopher allegedly threatened Melissa, and Cheryl relayed his story to the police. This development became a crucial turning point, prompting investigators to reopen the case. Over the following 3 months, police thoroughly reviewed the case files, re-interviewed everyone involved, and re-examined the evidence using modern forensic technology. Experts analyzed the bags containing the remains, as well as several samples collected from Christopher and Melissa's home, where the murder had apparently taken place. In August 2024, investigators held a press conference to announce that, 25 years after Melissa's death, her husband had finally been arrested. As with the witness's statement, police did not reveal specific details about the evidence uncovered during the renewed investigation. Some sources suggest that modern forensic tools may have identified DNA traces or other critical evidence confirming Christopher's involvement in the murder. The reason detectives are withholding these details is fairly standard. The more information made public before the trial, the greater the risk that the defense could use it to its advantage and attempt to undermine the evidence. At present, Christopher remains in jail awaiting trial and a preliminary hearing, during which he will enter a plea of either guilty or not guilty, has not yet been scheduled. Melissa's relatives are convinced that he will not escape justice, and the investigators share that belief. It appears they have indeed uncovered substantial evidence that will be nearly impossible to dispute. The case now seems to be nearing its conclusion, though it has taken nearly 26 years. Melissa's story has gained national attention, as its twists and developments are truly extraordinary. Initially, police were only able to confirm that the victim was deceased because her father, arrested for 5 murders, had asked investigators to find his missing daughter. Later, a podcast played a pivotal role in attracting the witness whose testimony led to the reopening of the investigation and ultimately to Christopher's arrest. As for Melissa's children, they too believe in their father's guilt and hope that justice will soon prevail. Beyond awaiting a guilty verdict, they also wish to uncover the complete truth and understand Christopher's motives, something that will only become possible if he chooses to confess. Moving on to the next case. Michael Haight. Michael Haight was born on January 7, 1980, in Seattle, Washington, and later moved with his family to Cedar City, Utah, after his father completed dental school. As a child, Michael was energetic and loved participating in sports such as baseball, basketball, and soccer. He also excelled academically and earned the prestigious rank of Eagle Scout. After graduating from high school in 1998, Michael spent the summer working at a fish processing plant in Alaska, where he quickly demonstrated his leadership abilities, advancing to the role of line manager and supervising a team of more than a dozen men. This experience reflected his strong work ethic and determination. Michael later went on a mission trip to South Brazil with the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, an experience that deepened his faith and strengthened his dedication to his religious community. Upon returning to the United States, he pursued a business degree at Southern Utah University, graduating in 2004. During his time at the university, Michael met his future wife, Tasha Earle, and the two fell in love. They were married in the St. George Temple on May 10, 2003. Michael appeared to be a devoted husband and father, often spending quality time with his family at sports events, school concerts, and working on projects together in the garage. However, on January 4, 2023, a horrifying discovery was made at the Haight residence in Enoch. 8 bodies were found, leaving investigators and neighbors in disbelief. The chain of events leading to this shocking discovery began when Tasha Haight failed to attend an online appointment, and her husband, Michael, did not show up for work. Concerned colleagues contacted the police to request a welfare check at the Haight home. When officers arrived, they knocked on the door but received no response. As they inspected the property, it appeared deserted. Given that the Haight's had 5 children, the officers contacted the Iron County School District to determine if any of the kids were in school that day. It was soon confirmed that none of them were present. Before entering the home, officers carefully cleared the premises to ensure there were no safety risks. After a comprehensive search, authorities verified that no one inside required medical attention and that there was no active threat. The Haight's single-story house with a basement was then designated a crime scene, and detectives arrived shortly thereafter. In the master bedroom, detectives discovered 4-year-old Gavin lying face down, his head turned to the left, with one arm tucked beneath his head on a pillow and a blanket partially covering his body. Tasha, Gavin's mother, was also found partially covered by the same blanket. On the other side of the bed, investigators found an older woman, later identified as Gail Earl, Tasha's mother, lying on her back with her head resting on a pillow, also partially covered by a blanket, just like her daughter and grandson. In Bree's room, the 12-year-old girl was discovered lying in bed, slightly inclined and partially covered with a blanket. In Ammon's room, a 7-year-old boy was found lying face down in the corner of the room, without a pillow or blanket. His twin sister, Sienna, was located in her own bedroom, lying on her left side in bed, her head resting on a pillow, and her body covered with a blanket. The oldest child, 17-year-old Macy, was also found in her bed, her head on a pillow, and her body covered by a blanket. In the basement's exercise room, detectives found Michael Haight lying on top of a sleeping bag. Tragically, all 8 family members were discovered dead from gunshot wounds. It quickly became apparent to detectives that Michael Haight was the primary suspect, and they believed he had murdered his wife, mother-in-law, and 5 children before taking his own life. As detectives began piecing together the events, a neighbor provided crucial information that helped reconstruct the timeline of the crime. The neighbor informed police that she had woken up around 3:30 a.m. to use the bathroom, and as she stepped out of her room, she heard a loud bang resembling fireworks. Realizing that fireworks were no longer permitted in the neighborhood at that time of year, she felt more irritated than alarmed by the noise. The neighbor recalled hearing one loud bang, followed by 2 quick successive ones, then a brief pause, another bang, a longer pause, and finally one last bang. Based on this testimony and the condition of the 8 victims found in the home, detectives concluded that the noises heard around 3:30 a.m. were directly linked to the tragedy, leading them to determine that Michael Haight carried out the brutal killings during that time period. During the investigation into the Haight family murders, detectives uncovered a 2020 report from an anonymous source who had contacted the Utah Division of Child and Family Services about possible abuse occurring in the Haight household. According to the report, 14-year-old Macy had confided in this individual, expressing fear of her father, which prompted further inquiry by authorities. Investigators proceeded to interview Macy and her parents separately. During Macy's interview, she revealed deeply disturbing details. She said her father had choked her on multiple occasions and that she constantly feared he might kill her. She stated that the violent behavior began in 2017 and described one incident where her father grabbed her by the shoulders and shoved her against a wooden piece of furniture. When questioned by detectives, Michael Haight denied harming his daughter, insisting that the situation had been misunderstood and attributing his anger to grief over his father's death and his brother's divorce. He admitted that he had taken his frustrations out on his eldest daughter. Despite Macy's account, Tasha chose not to press charges, and the Utah Department of Children and Family Services, the Enoch Police Department, and the Iron County Prosecutor's Office all decided not to pursue the case, determining that it did not meet the legal criteria for prosecution. A lethality assessment conducted with Tasha indicated that her relationship with Michael was not considered life-threatening. As a result, victim services were provided to Tasha and her children for several months. Further investigation later revealed another, hidden side of Michael that the community had not seen. According to Tasha's friends, when they visited her, they often had to speak in hushed tones or turn on the kitchen faucet to mask their conversations. Because they suspected Michael was monitoring and listening in on their conversations, Tasha's friends would often help her clean the house during their visits, which prevented Michael from finding reasons to criticize her. When texting Tasha, her friends noticed that she usually replied with short, cheerful messages, likely to maintain a positive image in case Michael read them. This gave the impression that everything was fine in their marriage. Detectives investigating the case later uncovered that Michael displayed extremely controlling behavior toward Tasha. For example, he would take away her car keys and phone to restrict her freedom. Another warning sign was his overreaction when Tasha purchased a $30 rug from Walmart to replace a dirty one, which was a reasonable household expense. Michael's anger over the purchase was unjustified, and he claimed it was wasteful. Tasha confided in her friends that her 7-year-old son, Ammon, was beginning to imitate Michael's negative behavior. When Tasha gave Ammon instructions, he would respond by saying, "That's not my job," which deeply concerned her as it showed his growing lack of respect and responsibility. Tasha's friends also shared that in 2022, she tried to take some time for herself by getting her nails done, a rare act of self-care considering her numerous duties. However, her husband Michael forbade her from doing so, placing strict limitations on her independence and personal choices. Furthermore, Michael frequently dismissed or ignored Tasha's directions, and their son Ammon often mirrored this behavior. After pampering herself, Tasha felt more confident in her appearance and decided to continue getting her nails done every month. However, Michael was displeased with her decision and voiced his disapproval, claiming it was too expensive. Tasha explained that it would only cost $25 monthly, but Michael remained unconvinced, arguing that the money should be spent on their children instead. His reaction stemmed from his obsessive need for control and his distorted sense of financial responsibility within the family. Around this same time, Tasha began focusing on self-care and started losing weight, a sensitive issue for her because Michael had repeatedly called her fat and ugly. Rather than supporting her, Michael became enraged and accused Tasha of being unfaithful, using her improved appearance as justification for his suspicions. His controlling tendencies intensified as he tried to manipulate Tasha's weight loss, pleading with her to stop because he feared other men might find her attractive. This demand reflected his deep insecurities and his desire to maintain absolute control over Tasha's body and actions. Tasha's friends also told detectives about an incident involving their kitchen table. When it broke and Tasha wanted to replace it, Michael refused to give her the money, once again highlighting his controlling nature. Frustrated with the old table, Tasha decided to take matters into her own hands and refinished it herself to improve its appearance and usability. However, Michael became upset with Tasha's decision because she had not sought his permission beforehand. Despite earning a comfortable income, Michael was extremely frugal during the holiday season. He gave Tasha only $100 for each of their 5 children to buy presents, which she felt was insufficient. Tasha always tried to ensure her children had a joyful Christmas, but Michael refused to contribute more, insisting that he worked hard for his money and saw no reason to share more of it with his family. He firmly believed that his income belonged solely to him. Michael's obsession with minimizing waste and conserving resources led him to enforce strict household rules. He required Tasha to wash and reuse plastic bags, even after multiple uses. This unreasonable demand added to her workload, leaving her exhausted and overwhelmed. His controlling behavior extended into every aspect of Tasha's daily life. For example, he insisted she use baby wipes for cleaning, claiming it was more environmentally friendly and cost-effective. However, this demand caused Tasha significant discomfort, hygiene problems, and unnecessary stress. Whenever she failed to comply with his rules, Michael warned her that there would be serious consequences, instilling fear and forcing her into submission. Tasha confided in friends that while Michael had always been cruel to her throughout their marriage, he had not directed that cruelty toward their children until the late 2010s. Over time, however, his abuse toward their daughter, Macy, intensified to the point that she contemplated suicide. Michael imposed impossible expectations on Macy, insisting she achieve perfect grades despite the emotional toll of his abusive behavior. The pressure became unbearable for her. Macy's friends recounted a troubling incident to detectives. One evening, Michael came home to find Macy being comforted by her mother. He exploded with anger and ordered Macy to clean her room, leaving her traumatized by the hatred and malice she saw in his eyes. Detectives also uncovered an incident involving 7-year-old Briley, who had disobeyed Michael while playing with a changing table. In response, Michael blamed Tasha for their children's behavior, calling them the worst and most disrespectful in the world. He then humiliated Tasha in front of all 5 children, calling her fat and ugly. This degrading incident became the final turning point for Tasha. After enduring 2 decades of abuse, she decided she could no longer remain in the marriage. Realizing the severe impact Michael's behavior had on their children, she prioritized their safety and well-being over maintaining the relationship. In December 2022, Tasha filed for divorce but requested that the papers be delivered after Christmas so her children could experience one last normal holiday before their lives changed forever. When Michael received the divorce papers, he attempted to behave normally, but Tasha could see through his act. He demanded that she leave the children behind, but she refused and took them to her mother's home in Lynn, Utah. Michael later appeared at his mother-in-law's house, trying to persuade Tasha to go for a drive with him, but she declined, sensing danger. After filing for divorce, Tasha's mother moved in to support her and the children. However, Michael's behavior only escalated the tension. He refused to vacate the family home, instead choosing to live in the basement. Tasha then discovered that he had secretly withdrawn $220,000 from their children's savings accounts without her knowledge or consent. She also realized that her inherited firearms were missing, leaving her family defenseless. The couple's children, Macy and Briley, were deeply affected by the constant turmoil at home. Macy kept a secret phone to record her father's angry outbursts as evidence for the divorce proceedings, while Briley often found comfort by spending time at a neighbor's house. Both girls expressed relief at their parents' decision to separate. On January 3, 2023, Tasha met with her attorney to discuss her divorce and voice her concerns about Michael's increasingly volatile behavior. Although she had relocated him to the basement, her attorneys questioned whether she felt safe. Tasha reassured them that she never feared for her own or her children's safety. Tragically, her confidence would soon prove to be misplaced. Investigators later uncovered disturbing digital evidence from the family's computers and cell phones. Just days before the tragic murders, Michael conducted a series of alarming Google searches on December 30th at 10:41 p.m. These searches focused on firearms and gun-related topics, exposing his sinister intent. Records showed that Michael had typed disturbing queries, such as how loud a 9mm gunshot is and what a gunshot sounds like. Before taking his own life, Michael wrote a note expressing his wish to end what he described as the controlling behavior he felt was imposed on him by his wife. In the note, he stated that he could no longer endure the situation and wanted to escape what he perceived as manipulation. Michael's words reflected deep frustration and despair, claiming that he had repeatedly sought help but felt ignored. He stressed that he did not want to become a burden on society. The details of this tragedy shocked the public, exposing a profoundly dysfunctional household consumed by control and violence. Michael's actions were both deliberate and calculated, as he meticulously planned the murders to ensure his wife and children were caught completely off guard. Moving on to the next case. Miranda Fenner. Before 1998, violence was rare in the small town of Laurel, Montana. When a woman was raped, stabbed, and had her throat slit in September of that year, residents were left stunned and wondered who could have committed such a crime. 2 months later, 18-year-old Miranda Fenner was killed in a similar manner. Now, after 2 decades, the perpetrator has been apprehended and held accountable. Miranda Fenner, a young woman with her entire life ahead of her, was simply trying to complete a shift at work when her life was abruptly taken. Sherry and Mike Fenner welcomed their daughter, Miranda, into the world on December 26, 1979. Miranda and her younger brother, Tim, were raised in Sacramento, California, before the family decided to relocate to Laurel, Montana, in 1990. The move was motivated by a desire to escape the big city and to be closer to family. Miranda Fenner had deep dimples in her cheeks, dark hair, and dark eyes. Her large heart and compassionate nature are fondly remembered by friends and family. She loved animals and dreamed of working with children one day. Her mother, who always supported the underdog, had reservations about some of Miranda's friends, but recognized her daughter's genuine desire to uplift those around her. Miranda was also unafraid to express her opinions, earning her the nickname Fasty from one of her teachers. A few months prior to her murder, she had been involved in a car accident that resulted in a broken neck, forcing her to wear a neck brace and remain at home until she fully recovered. After her recovery, Miranda was eager to begin a job at the movie store, a locally owned video rental shop in Laurel, now closed. Since her grandparents operated the Lohoff Motel across the street, her parents felt confident allowing her to work there. The store was only 3 blocks from her home, so there was little concern for her safety, even though she often closed the store alone. At the time, this was a typical scenario for young people employed in retail, with the worst-case scenario being that a customer might linger at closing time. On November 15, 1998, everything appeared normal for Miranda Fenner as she arrived for her shift at the movie store. That evening, however, Miranda's shift turned into a nightmare. She called her mother and then her uncle, with both conversations appearing ordinary. But around 8:20 p.m., the night took a tragic turn. 2 fishermen saw Miranda crawling in front of the movie store's entrance, bleeding and clearly injured. They immediately stopped to help her. After dialing 911, police arrived shortly thereafter. Around the same time, Miranda's brother Tim, who had ridden his bike to the store to rent a video game, noticed the flashing police lights. He stopped and turned around to call their father, Mike, who then rushed to the store as well. Officers informed Mike of what had happened and explained that Miranda was being airlifted by Life Flight helicopter to St. Vincent's Hospital in Billings, roughly 15 miles away. Sherry immediately left work after hearing from her mother that Miranda had been rushed to the hospital. While doctors worked frantically to save her, Sherry and Mike made their way to the clinic, anxiously awaiting news about their daughter's condition. Tragically, as Miranda underwent surgery for her injuries, she passed away. It was at that moment that Sherry and Mike realized their daughter had been murdered. Although the murder scene was horrifying, very little evidence remained. Miranda had suffered multiple stab wounds to the head and a slashed throat. No weapon was left at the scene, and investigators found no usable fibers or hairs from the attacker. Police were unable to identify a suspect or determine a motive. While a small amount of cash had been taken from the video store's register, robbery could not be conclusively established as the motive. Over the next 2 decades, investigators questioned more than 700 witnesses and followed numerous leads, including several false confessions, but none brought resolution. Miranda Fenner's parents never lost hope that their daughter's killer, or killers, would be caught. The case, however, went cold for nearly 2 decades. In 2012, her case was transferred to the Billings Metro Police Cold Case Unit, which continued to investigate. In 2016, Yellowstone County Police received another confession from Zachary O'Neill, a minor offender from the area. He claimed responsibility for the 1998 murders of both the previously raped woman and Miranda Fenner. Having dealt with numerous false confessions in the past, police were initially skeptical, as his account contained inconsistencies. Notably, he claimed to have killed the rape victim, who was in fact still alive, and the details he provided about Miranda's murder were largely public knowledge. Zachary O'Neill initially confessed while at a psychiatric hospital in Washington. Police dismissed this confession, but a determined Zachary returned to the Yellowstone County Jail in March 2017. At that time, he was intoxicated but admitted to the crimes again, providing additional details. Authorities collected his DNA before releasing him, as Montana law requires evidence beyond a confession for an arrest. Zachary's DNA later matched evidence from the rape victim's case. He had left her for dead after slitting her throat, confessing to her murder, not knowing she had survived. On the day of Miranda's murder, Zachary had been at the video store twice. Family members noted that on his second visit, he arrived just moments before Miranda was attacked. At the time, Zachary, then 18, had been questioned by police but denied any involvement in Miranda Fenner's murder. During the 2019 investigation, Zachary admitted that he used to steal in 1998 to support his drug habit. He stated that he was on meth on the day he killed Miranda. According to him, his first visit to the store had been to rent movies. A few days later, Miranda rang him up for the films he had rented, but when his mother, whom he was living with at the time, saw one of the movies, she ordered him to return it because it was pornographic. Zachary, however, returned to the store not only to return the movie, but also to commit a robbery. He waited until all the customers had left before striking. According to him, he stabbed Miranda out of fear that she would recognize him during the robbery. For years, he ignored the murder, but eventually his conscience caught up with him. After his own brother was murdered in 2013, Zachary felt relief when the killers were apprehended, and he wished for Miranda's family to experience the same sense of closure. In August 2019, Zachary O'Neill went on trial for both Miranda's murder and the attempted murder rape of the other woman. He pleaded guilty and was sentenced to 2 life terms in prison. Moving on to the next case. Nadine Lott. Nadine Lott was born in the late 1980s in Arlo, a town located on Ireland's southeastern coast. She was the eldest child of Claire and David Lott and had 3 younger siblings, Phoebe, Tanith, and Kayla. By the summer of 2012, at 26 years old, Nadine had blossomed into a charismatic young woman. She was eagerly preparing for a trip to Australia, anticipating a vacation full of adventure, sports, and new friendships. Nadine stood out among her peers with her radiant smile and captivating personality, which naturally drew people toward her. She maintained a wide circle of friends and had the rare ability to connect effortlessly with anyone. Yet, behind her outgoing demeanor, Nadine was a sensitive and emotionally vulnerable person who always tried to see the good in others. She deeply valued her family, who had provided her with love and support throughout her upbringing. Nadine developed a love for photography, capturing fleeting moments of life to preserve the beauty of the world around her. This passion eventually evolved into a profession, and she became a successful beautician, helping others enhance and appreciate their natural beauty. Nadine also faced certain challenges in her personal life. She was not in a hurry to settle into a committed relationship, preferring instead to embrace her independence and spend quality time with friends. Her longing for freedom inspired her to travel to Australia, where she was drawn to the warm climate, stunning coastlines, and exotic scenery, finding the atmosphere both refreshing and romantic. During her time in Australia, Nadine met Daniel Murdatt, and it seemed as though they were complete opposites. While Nadine was energetic and outgoing, Daniel was quiet and reserved, with intense eyes and a fit physique that immediately caught her attention. Despite their contrasting personalities, they shared an immediate and undeniable connection, discovering mutual interests and a profound emotional bond. As they spent more time together, their days became filled with unforgettable adventures and shared memories. They walked hand in hand along breathtaking beaches, swam in crystal-clear waters, and confided their deepest dreams and secrets. Nadine was fascinated by Daniel's surfing talent, while he was captivated by her carefree spirit, genuine heart, and contagious laughter. Their bond grew stronger with each passing day, free from any obstacles or hesitations. Daniel, a few years older than Nadine, came from Dayan, a suburb of Dublin, where he worked as a window fitter and lived with his family. To Nadine, the relationship was a casual fling, not something she expected to turn into a serious commitment. Phoebe was the first to learn about Daniel, and soon after their mother, Claire, discovered the relationship through her daughter. Claire quickly sensed that the romance might not endure. Nadine's life took a dramatic turn when she discovered she was pregnant with Daniel's child. A few months later, Daniel tried to rekindle their relationship and form a family, but the attempt ultimately failed. In November 2013, Nadine gave birth to a baby girl named Kia, yet Daniel was conspicuously absent during that life-changing event. Instead, it was her sister Phoebe who stepped in to provide emotional support and remain by her side. Phoebe stood with Nadine during labor, took the first photograph of the new mother and her baby, and played a crucial role in helping Nadine face the challenges of early motherhood. Nadine's pregnancy marked a pivotal shift in her life as she embraced her new role as a mother. Despite the hardships she encountered, Nadine found comfort and strength in Phoebe's constant love and support. Her story serves as a touching reminder of the intricate nature of love and relationships. Although her relationship with Daniel lacked emotional depth and true fulfillment, Nadine was determined to create a stable and nurturing home for her daughter. Daniel refused to accept responsibility for his actions and showed no interest in becoming a committed father, leaving Nadine to raise Kia on her own. She devoted herself fully to giving her daughter the best possible life. By 2016, Nadine hoped to build a home surrounded by loved ones, so she rented a house where they could all live together as a family. However, her dreams were shattered when Daniel, Kia's father, failed to move in with them. That realization marked the end of Nadine's hopes for a shared family life. Daniel's continual absence and repeated broken promises had left Nadine emotionally exhausted, leading her to end their relationship and begin a new chapter in her life. Despite their separation, she still held on to the hope that Kia would be able to maintain a bond with her father. Claire, Nadine's mother, had a more pragmatic view of Daniel, believing that his passion for boxing took precedence over his family responsibilities. In contrast, Nadine remained fully dedicated to her daughter, Kia, giving her the love, attention, and support she needed. As Kia grew up without a father figure, she looked up to her mother as her role model, learning from Nadine's strength and perseverance through life's difficulties. In October 2019, Claire encouraged Nadine to celebrate her birthday in Rome. During the trip, Nadine's daughter, Kia, also affectionately known as Nine, confided in her mother about the personal struggles she was facing. By that time, Nadine had moved on from her relationship with Daniel and was flourishing as a single mother. She enjoyed her work, took great pride in her achievements, and felt content with her life. Her future appeared bright, especially after she received an offer for a modeling opportunity. However, her joy was soon overshadowed when she realized that Daniel continued making empty promises to visit their daughter, Kia, in Ireland. When Daniel asked to meet Nadine under the pretense of giving her money for Kia, she was doubtful of his intentions, suspecting that he merely wanted to see her rather than their child. Nevertheless, she agreed to meet him, motivated by her desire to ensure that Kia did not develop negative feelings toward her father. Despite recognizing the growing impossibility of reconciliation, Nadine still clung to the faint hope of creating a real family. To protect Kia from disappointment, Nadine often made excuses for Daniel's absence. She wanted to shield her daughter from the pain caused by his irresponsibility and neglect. Meanwhile, Daniel was unwilling to let Nadine move on and grew increasingly paranoid that she might start seeing other men. Because of his controlling behavior and constant threats, Nadine felt compelled to keep her personal life hidden from him. In 2019, Nadine Lott's life changed dramatically after she officially ended her relationship with Daniel. She began dating a new partner from Turkey, but her efforts to keep the relationship private failed. When Daniel found out about Nadine's new partner, he became enraged, which triggered a series of stalking incidents that brought Nadine severe emotional turmoil. On December 5th, Nadine sent Daniel a direct message, making it clear that their relationship was over and insisting that he stop harassing her. She believed this would finally put an end to their toxic relationship. However, on December 13th, Nadine asked Daniel to look after their daughter, Kia, while she attended her aunt's birthday celebration at a nearby pub. Daniel agreed to take care of Kia at his home in Condon, which was located separately from Nadine's residence in Wicklow. On the night of December 14th, Daniel made several attempts to contact Nadine, calling her at 5:57 and 1:26 a.m., but she did not respond. Eventually, he sent her a message, urging her to return home soon. Nadine later came home and changed her clothes, but what happened afterward remains uncertain. What is known is that Daniel attacked Nadine, terrifying their 6-year-old daughter, Kia. The noise and screams drew the attention of a neighbor, Isla Klinovich, who went to investigate the source of the disturbance. Isla saw Nadine lying on the floor in the hallway while Daniel stood over her, his face twisted in anger and panic. Horrified by the scene, Isla retreated to her apartment and immediately contacted Nadine's family. When Claire, Nadine's mother, heard Isla's account, she was consumed by panic and dread. Daniel fled the scene in his Volvo, leaving behind a trail of dust and blood. When Claire rushed into Nadine's apartment, she was confronted with a horrifying sight. The walls and shattered glass were splattered with blood, a grim reflection of the violence that had just occurred. But the nightmare was far from over. At around 9:50 a.m., Claire, Phoebe, and Kyle entered the kitchen and were devastated by what they saw. Nadine's body lay on the floor, brutally mutilated and lifeless. Meanwhile, roughly 20 miles away in the town of Lar, Daniel lost control of his car and crashed into a ditch. Miraculously, he sustained only minor injuries. John Beck Ken came across the wreck and was stunned by the scene, a car with broken headlights, shattered glass, and a lone vehicle lying in the ditch. At first, he assumed the driver had been drinking after a Christmas party, but as he drew closer, he realized the car was empty. Suddenly, Daniel appeared from the fog, his eyes blank, his body trembling, and his clothes drenched in blood. Daniel confessed to the crime in a despairing tone to a witness. He was then taken to the hospital in an ambulance, repeatedly muttering that he loved Nadine as if seeking forgiveness. Meanwhile, Nadine's apartment was in disarray. When paramedics and police officers arrived, they were met with a strong smell of blood. The walls and furniture were smeared with it, and the scene was chaotic. Paramedic Ian Clark was struck by the extent of the destruction. Broken dishes, shattered glass, and bloody footprints indicated that a violent crime had occurred. Phoebe and Kyle rushed Nadine to urgent care after a severe accident where medical professionals were able to save her life despite her critical injuries, which had left her unconscious. Nadine was rushed to St. Vincent's Hospital, where she was admitted to the intensive care unit. Doctors recorded extensive injuries to Nadine's head, neck, and chest at 10:58 a.m. Her condition was critical, with 64 wounds identified on her body, the causes of which were not immediately clear. Nadine underwent multiple blood transfusions, yet her condition remained dire. Claire held on to the hope that her daughter would recover. She stayed by Nadine's side in the hospital, surrounding her with familiar comforts from home: family photos, Nadine's favorite perfumes, and cherished keepsakes. Despite the doctor's grim prognosis, Claire remained steadfast in her faith, believing that her love and presence could guide Nadine through the fight for her life. Meanwhile, Daniel was scheduled to appear in court on December 16th, where the judge ruled that he be held in custody until his trial. That same day, Claire accompanied Nadine to a follow-up examination to evaluate the extent of her brain injuries. She prayed that Nadine would find the strength to survive. Tragically, Nadine's wounds proved too severe, and she passed away on December 17th between 3 o'clock and 4 p.m., never regaining consciousness. Irish police officer Colonel Dean McCarthy described the attack as one of the most savage acts of violence he had ever encountered. Following the murder, Chief State Pathologist Dr. Linda Mogan conducted the autopsy at the city funeral home on December 18th. Afterward, Nadine's loved ones, especially her family, were left struggling with unanswered questions. Claire was overwhelmed by her thoughts, desperately trying to comprehend the horror that had unfolded. The following day, Daniel confessed to the horrific crime, recounting in chilling detail how he had attacked and brutally killed Nadine. According to his statement, he began by grabbing Nadine, striking her on the head, and then repeatedly punching her. Despite her attempts to resist, he continued the assault, kicking her and eventually stabbing and strangling her with a charger cord. Kia, who witnessed the terrifying scene, begged her father to stop, but her pleas went unheard. Though Nadine fought with all her strength, Daniel's physical power was overwhelming. A funeral service for Nadine took place on December 22nd at St. Mary and Peter's Church in Arlo, her hometown. The ceremony attracted more than 1,000 mourners, with hundreds more watching the live broadcast as they gathered to say their final goodbyes. 6 people carefully carried Nadine's coffin, the young and beautiful woman appearing as though she were peacefully asleep for eternity. The altar was adorned with scarlet velvet roses. Nadine's mother, Claire, sat in the front row, struggling to contain her tears as she gazed at her daughter's coffin. Her eyes reflected love and admiration for the one who now rested before her. Family and friends surrounded her, overwhelmed with sorrow as they held handkerchiefs to their faces and wept openly. David Lott, Nadine's father, stepped forward, his voice trembling with grief, and placed one of Nadine's elegant handbags beside the coffin. Nadine possessed an extraordinary talent for transforming anything into a stylish accessory that complemented her unique fashion sense. Then Kyle, a close family friend, approached the altar holding a photograph of Nadine and Kia smiling brightly as they embraced. Kia, bewildered and heartbroken, clung to her mother's side, unable to understand the loss she had endured. Phoebe, Nadine's sister, brought a pair of shoes to the altar, the same ones Nadine had planned to wear to her prom. Overcome with emotion, Phoebe fought to hold back tears. Tanith, another dear friend, gently placed a photo album on the altar, filled with treasured memories of Nadine's carefree days, joyful gatherings, and radiant laughter. Those memories would live on forever, a touching reminder of the joyful moments they had shared with Nadine. With compassion etched on his face, Father Michael Moore conducted the service with moving words about eternal life and hope, bringing comfort to the grieving family and friends. Looking tenderly at Kia, he expressed gratitude for the boundless happiness she had brought Nadine during her life, and wished that Kia's future would be filled with love, care, and protection. He reassured Kia that her mother's loved ones would always remain by her side, serving as her guardian angels. Nadine's sisters, Phoebe and Tanith, tearfully said their final goodbye, overcome with the pain of losing their beloved sister. The ceremony concluded with solemn funeral music, and Nadine's coffin was laid to rest in the San Gabriel Cemetery. As her loved ones offered their last farewells, they found solace in knowing that Nadine's soul was finally at peace. Moving on to the next case. Sarah Foxwell. Today, we will explore the case of a young girl who disappeared from her own bedroom in the middle of the night, just days before Christmas. This case rapidly drew widespread attention. More than 3,000 individuals participated in the search efforts, and ultimately, detectives uncovered some chilling details that led them to an unexpected and shocking revelation. Sarah Foxwell was born on May 18, 1998, in Salisbury, Maryland. She was raised in a large family with 2 sisters and 4 brothers. Her mother also had 3 additional children from a previous marriage. In time, Sarah's parents divorced, and her mother faced difficult circumstances, having to care for all of the children by herself. She worked long hours, so the kids often stayed with relatives. Sarah, being the middle child, constantly tried to maintain peace among her siblings whenever arguments and fights arose. She always radiated positivity and often succeeded in bringing her family together. In December 2009, when Sarah was 11 years old, she temporarily moved in with her aunt and grandparents. Christmas was approaching, and her mother was working extra shifts to afford gifts for each of her children. Her aunt lived on the outskirts of Salisbury in a large farmhouse. The kids loved being there because of the wide-open space where they could play freely. On December 22nd, everything appeared normal. With just 3 days remaining until Christmas, the children were full of excitement, running around the house, playing, and simply enjoying themselves. Their aunt ordered pizza for dinner, and at around 9 p.m., everyone began getting ready for bed. Sarah shared a room with her 6-year-old sister, Emma, located at the end of the hallway near the back door. They talked for a while before drifting off to sleep. The next morning, Sarah's grandfather woke up and went to wake the children. When he entered the girls' room, he found only Emma there. Assuming that Sarah might have already gotten up, he searched the entire house, but couldn't find her anywhere. He informed her aunt, and together they began searching every corner of the house. Eventually, they realized that Sarah was nowhere inside. Her aunt initially thought Sarah might have gone outside to play in the snow that had fallen overnight. However, she quickly noticed that Sarah's shoes and jacket were still at home. Then her aunt observed something odd. Sarah's toothbrush was missing from its usual place in the bathroom. After searching the area surrounding the house with her grandfather and finding no trace of Sarah, her aunt decided to call Sarah's mother. She rushed over immediately, and they contacted the police. The officers arrived within minutes and promptly began searching the house. Sarah's aunt told them that she always made sure to check all the doors and windows every night before going to bed, and she had done the same the previous evening. The police could not find Sarah anywhere inside the house or in the nearby area. After learning about the missing toothbrush, the officers began to suspect the possibility of an abduction. They theorized that the kidnapper might have taken the toothbrush before leaving the house with Sarah, so they decided to verify whether all the doors and windows were indeed secured. When they reached the back door near Sarah's room and tried the handle, it opened immediately. Sarah's aunt insisted that the door had been locked the previous night and had not been opened since. However, she recalled that they kept a spare key outside near the entrance. When she went to check, the key was gone. This further reinforced the abduction theory. The fact that the perpetrator knew about the spare key suggested that he was familiar with the family. Another disturbing detail was that their dog hadn't made a single sound during the night, even though it usually barked at strangers. Fearing that Sarah had been kidnapped, investigators quickly launched a large-scale search. News of her disappearance spread swiftly, and many local residents reached out to the police to offer their assistance. The sheriff addressed the public through the media, urging everyone to inspect their properties for anything suspicious. Dozens of local officers were mobilized to take part in the search. They also received assistance from police departments in neighboring towns and even from other states. Everyone involved hoped to find Sarah alive. Considering that the perpetrator had taken her toothbrush, it might have suggested an intention to keep her alive, so the police dedicated all their resources to the search. Outside the house, they discovered their first clue. There were relatively fresh tire tracks in the snow, indicating that the abductor had likely arrived by car. Since all of Sarah's warm clothes were still inside, it was evident that the perpetrator could not have taken her on foot. Meanwhile, Sarah's relatives were brought to the police station, where something unexpected occurred. Sarah's 6-year-old sister, Emma, who had shared the same room with her, tugged on her grandmother's sleeve and whispered that she had a secret. She had seen the person who took Sarah. According to Emma, she woke up to hear a man speaking to her sister. She didn't understand what was going on but became frightened, so she pretended to be asleep. A few moments later, she saw the man leaving the room with Sarah. Her story stunned the family, but what she said next was even more chilling. She recognized the man. It was Mr. Tommy. The adults immediately knew who she was referring to. 30-year-old Thomas Leggs, the former boyfriend of Sarah's aunt. Although they had broken up a few months earlier, he had spent a great deal of time at their house, and all the children were familiar with him. The police also knew Thomas well because of his extensive criminal record. Over the years, he had repeatedly come to their attention for crimes involving women and young girls. He was first imprisoned at the age of 18 for assaulting a 12-year-old girl and was sentenced to 4 years, but released after only a few months. Later, he received a 7-year sentence for attacking another minor, yet again was released early, this time after serving just 6 months for good behavior. Shortly thereafter, he received another 6-month sentence for a different assault. Then, on the same day his wife came home from the hospital with their newborn daughter, he attempted to assault another girl. The woman later divorced him and obtained a restraining order against Thomas because he had threatened to kill both her and their daughter. Another incident took place when a woman and her young daughter moved to the same street where Thomas lived. One day, the girl and her friend were sitting on the porch of their house when Thomas approached them. He told one of the girls that he had been watching her play in the yard and called her a wild girl. Then he picked up a stick and began hitting her on the buttocks. The frightened girl ran inside and told her mother what had just happened. The woman looked out the window, saw Thomas, and realized that she had seen his face before. Before moving into the neighborhood, she had checked the local sex offender registry, where Thomas's photo was listed. The mother reported the incident to the police, and the case went to court, but Thomas managed to escape any punishment for his actions. Before the trial began, the woman was instructed not to mention that Thomas was on the sex offender registry or that he had prior convictions for sexual assault. The reason for this restriction was the concern that mentioning it might prejudice the jury, resulting in an unfair verdict for Thomas. Just a few months before Sarah's disappearance, Thomas was arrested again. He had broken into the bedroom of a 24-year-old woman in the middle of the night, undressed, and began pleasuring himself while standing next to her bed. After being taken into custody, he was released on bail. At first, Thomas managed to conceal his criminal background from Sarah's aunt, but she eventually found out about it. Nonetheless, he somehow succeeded in convincing her that all the accusations against him were false and that he was innocent of everything he had been charged with. Considering all of this, detectives were certain that Thomas was responsible for Sarah's abduction. Her relatives also recalled that while Thomas was dating Sarah's aunt, he had spent much more time with Sarah than with any of the other children in the house. At the time, no one thought much of it, but after her disappearance, that detail became deeply unsettling. The police wanted to question Thomas, so they went to his residence. He lived just a few miles away, in a shed located on his parents' property. Investigators brought Thomas in for questioning and obtained a warrant to search the shed where he lived. Inside, they found a mess and extremely poor living conditions, but there was no evidence directly linking him to Sarah's disappearance. However, police discovered a vast collection of magazines and DVDs containing adult material. The shed was practically filled with them. During the interrogation, Thomas repeatedly denied any involvement in Sarah's disappearance. He claimed that he was trying to deal with his issues, referring to his tendency to commit crimes against underage girls. According to Thomas, during the period when he was dating Sarah's aunt, he had purposely avoided being alone with the children so that no one could falsely accuse him of inappropriate behavior. When told that Emma had seen him on the night of the abduction, Thomas asserted that the girl often made up stories and insisted he hadn't been there. Detectives did not believe a word he said, and not just because of his criminal past. While discussing the disappearance of 11-year-old Sarah, Thomas kept smirking and mocking them. The sheriff even suspected that Thomas viewed his crime as flawless and believed the police would never be able to prove his guilt. Thomas also claimed to have a solid alibi. He said he had been at a bar with a friend late into the night. Investigators promptly verified this claim, and to their surprise, the alibi was partly confirmed. Thomas had indeed been seen at the bar, but there was one major problem. He left around 1 a.m., and from that point until about 7 a.m., no one, including his parents, saw him. When investigators examined his phone, they found that on that same night, Thomas had sent messages to several women, asking to meet up, but all of them refused. Despite everything they had uncovered, detectives still couldn't get Thomas to confess. They hoped that the girl was still alive, so they put all their efforts into finding her. When they seized his pickup truck, the police immediately discovered several significant clues. Inside the vehicle lay Sarah's green toothbrush and a large lollipop. Investigators thought that Thomas could have used the candy to lure her into his car. The tire tracks also matched with the tracks left in the snow in front of the house on the night of Sarah's disappearance. The man himself told detectives that he hadn't been to that house in over a month, and now they had proof that he had lied. Despite the fact that Thomas continued to deny everything, the police still hoped to find Sarah. Hundreds of officers and volunteers continued searching the area, scouring the territory for many miles around her house. They checked abandoned buildings, forests, ravines, and bodies of water. Canine units with search dogs tried to pick up the girl's scent, while helicopters scoured the area from above. The police also received enormous support from the local community. People came to the police station and signed up as volunteers, despite the bad weather and the approaching holidays. Unfortunately, on that day, the search once again yielded no results. But no one even thought about giving up, and early the next morning, they went out to search for her again. Throughout this time, the stream of volunteers not only didn't dwindle, but grew even larger. In total, 3,000 people joined the search efforts. The sheriff even had to relocate the coordination center to the large baseball stadium because the police station simply couldn't fit such a huge number of people. Notably, among the volunteers were not only adults, but also their children. They handed out water, hot tea, and food. Everyone tried to do their best, hoping that eventually it would help them find Sarah alive. Meanwhile, investigators obtained another piece of evidence linking Thomas to the abduction. As soon as the man was brought to the station, he was given a new set of clothes, and his own clothes were sent to the lab. Experts found foreign DNA on the suspect's underwear and compared it to a sample from Sarah obtained from her belongings. It was a complete match. Considering the fact that DNA was found on his underwear, detectives came to a grim conclusion. Apparently, after the abduction, Thomas sexually assaulted her. The second day of the search also yielded no results, and on the morning of December 25th, Christmas Day, thousands of people once again went to look for Sarah. Despite the holiday, none of them even considered giving up. On that same day, investigators received GPS data from Thomas's phone. Unfortunately, there weren't exact locations, but rather just information about his phone connecting to specific cell towers. Police found out that on the night of Sarah's disappearance, his phone had connected to 3 towers, allowing them to determine the approximate triangular area where he must have been. Investigators focused all their efforts in this area, which was located practically on the state border, about 8 miles from Sarah's aunt's house. This area was mostly covered with trees. Hundreds of people combed through every inch of this territory, hoping for a Christmas miracle that Sarah would be found alive. Unfortunately, reality turned out to be much more tragic. Around 4 p.m., police noticed Sarah's body on the ground, almost at the state border. She was found lying on her back, her arms lifted upward and pointing toward the sky. When medical experts began examining the body, even they were horrified. At first, they confirmed that the victim had been sexually assaulted. They found signs of strangulation, but concluded that the perpetrator had failed to kill her by that method. In Sarah's lungs, experts discovered traces of dirt, suggesting that the killer had tried to drown her in a puddle. During this brutal act, the victim lost consciousness. Afterward, she suffered severe burns. According to the experts, the perpetrator may have left her in the forest for some time, gone to get gasoline, returned, and then set Sarah on fire. Traces of smoke were also detected in her lungs, indicating that she was still alive at that moment. This also explained why her hands were raised and pointing toward the sky. Such a position can occur when a person is exposed to fire. The sheer cruelty of the act shocked everyone involved in the case. Even the detectives struggled to believe that such horrific atrocities had truly been inflicted upon the victim. But once they understood what had happened to Sarah, all they wanted was one thing: to ensure that Thomas received the death penalty. Despite his continued denials, there was an overwhelming amount of evidence against him. After the discovery of Sarah's body, forensic experts found several of her hairs and small fibers from her pajamas on the front seat of Thomas's pickup truck, further confirming his connection to the abduction. Combined with all the other evidence, this eliminated any real chance of him avoiding punishment. The wait for the trial lasted more than a year, but it ultimately never began. In early 2011, the prosecution decided to offer Thomas a plea deal. Under its terms, he would plead guilty and receive a life sentence instead of the death penalty. Considering what Thomas had done to Sarah, the plea deal might appear unjust, but there were several serious reasons supporting this decision. The main reason was that Sarah's younger sister would have been required to testify multiple times in court, in the presence of the murderer. The abduction and death of her sister had already been a severe emotional trauma for her, and the trial could have caused even greater harm. Another reason for offering the plea deal was that the prosecution could not be completely certain of securing a death sentence. If Thomas's defense team had managed to obtain a different verdict, he could have eventually gained the chance of release, something that was explicitly ruled out under the terms of the deal. There was also another complication. At that time, the state governor opposed the death penalty, which further reduced the likelihood of achieving such a sentence. Ultimately, Thomas agreed to the deal and confessed everything the detectives had already uncovered without his cooperation. He admitted that he had lured Sarah out of her home, then took her away, sexually assaulted, and killed her. He was sentenced to 2 life terms without the possibility of parole and was transferred to a maximum security prison. Within the first few days of his imprisonment, another inmate attacked him during lunch with a makeshift weapon, inflicting multiple severe cuts. Thomas survived, and prison officials implemented additional security measures to protect him from other inmates who wanted to harm him. Sarah's case caused widespread outrage because the justice system had repeatedly allowed Thomas opportunities for release, enabling him to continue committing crimes. As a result, the state of Maryland enacted Sarah's Law, which requires that anyone convicted of child abuse must serve at least 15 years in prison before becoming eligible for parole. Moving on to the next case. Yolanda Cirillo. Yolanda Cirillo was born in Miami, Florida. She was a 28-year-old single mother who led a quiet life away from the fast-paced city environment. Yolanda devoted herself entirely to raising her daughter and being a dedicated mother, giving up her previous party lifestyle. After some time, Yolanda felt ready to seek stability and find a new partner. She began a relationship with Michel Escoto, a man admired for his attractive appearance and meticulous grooming. Their relationship, which began as innocent and peaceful, gradually evolved into love. Yolanda and Michel met while attending a computer engineering school, even though their personalities were opposite. She was calm and pragmatic, whereas he was romantic, adventurous, and outgoing. Despite their contrasting natures, they connected deeply and began what seemed to be a promising relationship. Michel and Yolanda Cirillo appeared to be an unlikely pair. However, after living together for a year, they started building a family. Yolanda, who already had a child from a previous relationship, was overjoyed to see her boyfriend Escoto showing affection toward her daughter. Everything appeared perfect, but Michel still had one unfulfilled ambition. He wanted to build a successful career and start his own business. Yolanda wholeheartedly supported Michel's dream because she believed his success would provide a stable future for her and her daughter. She also hoped that their relationship would eventually lead to marriage and a complete family. Michel promised Yolanda that once he achieved financial success, he would give them the dream life they both longed for. When analyzing the most profitable industries in Miami, Michel realized there was a strong demand for cosmetic services. Consequently, he decided to explore that field. With his basic knowledge of hairdressing, he wanted to learn more about business management to open his own salon. His goal was to create a space that welcomed everyone. Michel found a beauty school near his home and enrolled in February 2002. While studying there, he noticed that he stood out as one of the few men in the beauty industry and was surrounded by many energetic, young women. These women were drawn to Michel because of his charm, and he easily captivated them, which made him popular among the female students. However, despite being in a committed relationship with Yolanda, Michel could not resist the allure of Wendy Trapaga, a beautiful 21-year-old woman. He began flirting with her and often behaved inappropriately, yet he chose not to tell Yolanda about his behavior. Every night, Michel still returned home to Yolanda, maintaining the illusion of a normal family life. Nevertheless, the more time he spent with Wendy, the more guilt he felt toward Yolanda. Wendy Trapaga was unlike any woman Michel had previously encountered. She was sweet, kind-hearted, and had the figure of a model. Wendy was born on April 29, 1981, to her parents Miriam and Ernest. She was raised in a stable and loving home. Her father, Ernest, had always been deeply affectionate toward Wendy and ensured that she grew up in an atmosphere filled with love and respect. Ernest had worked as a cargo pilot, and his job had required him to travel frequently, which made Wendy eagerly await his return after each trip. Every time he came home, Wendy was overjoyed and always received a gift from him. March 31, 1988, became an unforgettable day in Wendy's life when she was 16 years old. Her father's plane exploded at an altitude of 150 feet and crashed onto a barren area near the runway. The tragedy claimed the lives of everyone on board. The deep sorrow Wendy felt that day stayed with her throughout her life. Ernest was 61 years old when he died, leaving Wendy's mother, Miriam, devastated. After becoming a widow, Miriam dedicated herself to supporting her family and found employment as a school administrative assistant. She worked diligently and supervised extracurricular programs at an elementary school in Miami-Dade County. In time, Miriam found love again and married Juan Bonet. Wendy then gained half-siblings who warmly accepted her, providing the affection she had long missed since her father's passing. During her teenage years, Wendy developed a strong interest in aesthetics and high fashion. She possessed striking beauty, with deep brown eyes, long flowing hair, and a radiant smile that drew everyone's attention. Despite her beauty, Wendy remained humble and kind, which made those around her admire her even more. After completing her education, Wendy got married, but unfortunately, the marriage soon ended. This disappointment motivated her to pursue her passion and learn from her relatives who managed beauty salons. She later enrolled in Label Beauty Academy in Miami. There, Wendy met Michel Escoto, a man who made her smile. Michel's charm and compliments completely captivated her. He introduced himself as an executive in the web design industry with a degree in technology. Perhaps losing her father at a young age made Wendy more sympathetic toward older men, whom she considered safe. However, Michel did not reveal to Wendy that he already had a girlfriend, Yolanda. Instead, he continued spending more time with Wendy. The feelings between Michel and Wendy grew stronger as they spent increasing amounts of time together. While Yolanda believed that Michel was busy focusing on his career, his relationship with Wendy gradually evolved from emotional to physical. Michel and Wendy became nearly inseparable. Meanwhile, Yolanda felt unsettled by the growing distance in her relationship with Michel, even though they had been together for over 2 years. She was unaware that Michel frequently met other women, including one who even sponsored his education. At first, Michel saw Wendy merely as a friend, but with time, his emotions deepened. He cherished the sense of freedom and lack of pressure that he felt in his relationship with Wendy. However, Michel had always kept his relationship with Wendy a secret. Even though Michel and Wendy had entered their second month as a couple, he continued to hide it from everyone, which left Wendy feeling confused. At the same time, Yolanda noticed that Michel was becoming increasingly distant, and their relationship began to feel more like a friendship than a romance. Yolanda grew suspicious of Michel's schedule, and the lack of communication caused them to drift further apart. Eventually, Michel decided to end his relationship with Yolanda because he had fallen in love with Wendy. In August 2002, Michel and Yolanda had a heated argument, and to express his dissatisfaction, Michel packed his belongings and left. Yolanda was in disbelief. She had dreamed of a shared future with Michel, but he walked away without offering any explanation. Yolanda tried to understand her faults and the reason for his departure. She repeatedly called Michel, but he refused to answer. Eventually, Yolanda managed to access his voicemail by decoding his password and discovered messages revealing that he had moved in with another woman named Wendy. Yolanda was shocked and furious when she learned about Michel and Wendy's relationship. Meanwhile, Michelle and Wendy had moved into a small apartment in Miami. Unexpectedly, in that humble space, the two began a life filled with dreams and happiness. Although some members of Wendy's family disapproved of her decision to live with Michelle, her mother, Miriam, was especially worried since Michelle was nearly 10 years older than Wendy and still unemployed. Miriam wondered whether Wendy and Michelle ever discussed their finances or sources of income. She was also surprised to find that their home was almost empty, with Wendy and Michelle even sleeping on the floor. What mattered most to her, however, was Wendy's happiness. Wendy had always been careful with her money and maintained a strict budget, whereas Michelle was reckless with his spending and vague about how he earned his income. Miriam assumed that Michelle worked in information technology to ease her doubts. Because so many questions surrounded Michelle, tension grew between Miriam and Wendy regarding Wendy's plans to marry him. Miriam strongly disagreed with her daughter's rushed decision to get married. Disregarding her mother's warning, Wendy and Michelle went ahead with their plans. They decided to hold a small wedding ceremony at City Hall in October 2002, opting for a simple legal procedure without much formality. When Miriam asked why they were getting married so quickly, Wendy confided that she was pregnant. On October 10, 2002, Wendy and Michelle exchanged vows at Miami Beach City Hall. They then planned a modest honeymoon in Key West, Florida. Michelle and Wendy departed on Friday, October 11th, intending to return by Sunday evening. Their 2-day trip to Key West was filled with joy and excitement. However, on Sunday, Michelle and Wendy were hesitant to bring their short vacation to an end. Michelle had reserved a luxurious suite in an elegant and romantic hotel. Wendy was overjoyed when she learned that their honeymoon was unexpectedly extended. She immediately informed her mother about their decision to stay longer. Wendy's mother, Miriam, was equally pleased to hear the news. Although she felt some concern about Wendy's health because of her pregnancy, she was genuinely happy for her daughter's joy. Michelle and Wendy envisioned a romantic evening that would include dining out, possibly watching a movie, or dancing together at a nightclub. They arrived at the hotel close to midnight and spent some time alone in their room. Neither of them knew that this would be Wendy's final night alive. At around 5:30 a.m. on Monday, Miriam was suddenly awakened by a phone call. Seeing the time, she felt uneasy about receiving a call so early. Feeling anxious, she answered the phone. On the other end was Michelle, speaking in a cryptic and uneasy tone, asking whether Wendy was with her. Michelle explained that they had gone out drinking the previous night, and Wendy had wanted to stay, even though he was worried about their unborn child. This had sparked their first argument inside the car while driving home. He claimed that he had gone back to their apartment alone, leaving Wendy outside. When he returned 5 to 10 minutes later, she was gone. All his attempts to reach her by phone had failed. After speaking with Michelle, Miriam agreed to give Wendy some space despite being deeply worried about her disappearance. She tried not to panic, but she knew that Wendy would never behave that way. At around 6 a.m., a sanitation worker following his usual route through a commercial warehouse district in the Northwest Dade area contacted the Miami police after noticing something strange in a parking lot between two cars. As he approached, he discovered a woman dressed in a blue evening gown lying face down in a pool of blood. When forensic experts arrived at the scene, they were shocked to find blood splattered across a nearby vehicle. The autopsy later revealed that the woman had been struck repeatedly with a blunt object, leaving her body severely disfigured and almost unrecognizable. Although no weapon was found at the scene, the victim was quickly identified as Wendy Trapaga thanks to her driver's license and a wallet containing personal identification found nearby. When Miriam received the devastating news of her daughter's death, she fell into profound despair. Tears streaming down her face, Miriam, who had already lost her husband, was now forced to confront the sudden death of her daughter. As detectives worked to uncover the cause of Wendy's murder, Miriam received a call from Wendy's husband, Michelle, asking if there were any updates about Wendy. Miriam was speechless and struggled to tell Michelle that Wendy was no longer alive. A detective stepped in, taking over the call to inform Michelle that officers would visit his home to discuss the matter further. Michelle was completely stunned and unable to utter a word. Police took him into custody and brought him to the station for questioning. During a 14-hour interrogation, Michelle recounted the events of the night leading up to Wendy's tragic death. As they had left the hotel and driven home around 3 a.m., Michelle and Wendy had gotten into an argument over drinking. During the argument, Wendy had unexpectedly admitted to Michelle that she was not pregnant, which had added to the tension of the argument. As they had approached their apartment, Michelle had decided to go inside to give them both time to calm down, leaving Wendy in the car. That had been the last time he had seen Wendy. The autopsy report later revealed that Wendy had died from being repeatedly beaten with a blunt object, causing 15 to 20 severe injuries to her face and neck. Her face had been unrecognizable due to the injuries. There had also been signs of strangulation. Investigators had also found strange DNA on Wendy's dress. Physical examination had revealed that Wendy had had alcohol and sedatives in her system. Her estimated time of death was determined to be between 3 and 5 a.m. on October 14th. Several unusual details were also uncovered. Wendy had been found barefoot, yet her feet were completely clean. Additionally, there were no injuries to her hands or feet, suggesting that she might not have resisted the attack or that she could have been unconscious or restrained at the time. The medical examiner also confirmed that Wendy had not been pregnant when she died, which raised further questions about the motive behind her false claim. Investigators soon discovered a new lead, a phone call made by Michelle at 3:15 a.m. on the night of Wendy's death. Detectives followed this lead and found that Michelle's final call had been to his ex-girlfriend, Yolanda. When notified of Wendy's death, Yolanda recounted her past relationship with Michelle to the authorities. She admitted that she had once harbored deep feelings for Michelle and had been devastated by his sudden disappearance. Despite her repeated efforts to reach him, he had not responded until the fall of 2002, when he finally returned her call. During questioning, Michelle admitted to having an affair with another woman, but insisted that he had no emotional attachment to Wendy. He claimed that he still loved Yolanda and wanted to rekindle their relationship. Yolanda, who continued to have feelings for Michelle, believed his words and hoped that their love would be revived. However, Michelle continued to live a double life, deceiving both women. The investigation was severely hindered by the absence of solid evidence. There was no DNA, no fingerprints, no surveillance footage, and no murder weapon. All that remained were conflicting statements with no definitive proof. Roughly 2 months after Wendy's death, Michelle once again became the main suspect in the case. When he was caught attempting to claim Wendy's life insurance benefits, questions arose about his true motives. Investigators learned that Michelle was the sole beneficiary of the policy, which was valued at $1 million, leading detectives to suspect that greed had been the driving force behind the crime. The investigative team began to pursue this financial motive as their primary theory. Meanwhile, an unexpected part of Michelle's past came to light during the inquiry. He had previously been arrested and charged with armed robbery, in addition to being accused of unlawful firearm possession and drug-related offenses. 3 years after Wendy's death, detectives decided to question Yolanda once again, suspecting that she possessed more information than she had initially revealed. After Wendy's death, Michelle and Yolanda reconciled and began living together again, but their life together was far from happy. When Yolanda was brought in for questioning, law enforcement officers confronted her with evidence showing that she had been the one who financed Michelle and Wendy's honeymoon after their wedding. The police pressured Yolanda to tell the truth, warning her of the serious consequences of lying. Gradually, Yolanda began to open up to investigators. According to her statement, when she and Michelle resumed their relationship in the fall, Michelle had told her that he was forced to marry Wendy because she was pregnant. However, in reality, Michelle was indifferent toward Wendy and planned to eliminate her in order to obtain the $1 million insurance payout. Michelle and Yolanda's ultimate plan was to murder Wendy and claim her substantial life insurance money. Blinded by love, Yolanda agreed to go along with Michelle's plot. The only thing that mattered to her was being reunited with him. According to her subsequent testimony, after Michelle failed to kill Wendy during their honeymoon, he decided to take more drastic action. Michelle allegedly spiked Wendy's drink with a sedative while they were in their hotel room. Once Wendy began to drift off to sleep, he carried her outside and placed her in the car. In the middle of the night, Michelle went to Yolanda's house and asked to borrow her car. He then drove to a remote parking lot in Northwest Dade and told Yolanda to stay inside the vehicle for a few minutes. Yolanda claimed that she saw Michelle return to her car with blood on his hands and a crowbar. They then drove to Biscayne Bay, where Michelle disposed of the murder weapon and washed away the remaining traces of evidence. Afterward, Yolanda drove Michelle back to the residence he had shared with Wendy, where he got rid of his blood-stained clothes. However, Yolanda's testimony was considered questionable. It was possible that she had been more directly involved in Wendy's murder than she admitted. If Michelle had not personally struck Wendy with the crowbar, it was entirely plausible that Yolanda herself had inflicted the fatal injuries and caused the brutal disfigurement of Wendy's body. Unfortunately, the complete truth of this case may never be known, largely due to the immunity agreement that shielded Yolanda from arrest or prosecution. Michelle's defense attorney used this fact to argue that Yolanda was solely responsible for the murder in an attempt to protect his client. Nevertheless, after just 2.5 hours of deliberation, the jury found Michel Escoto guilty of first-degree murder and sentenced him to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. Although Wendy's family finally felt that justice had been achieved after years of waiting, they remained deeply dissatisfied that Yolanda Cirillo would continue to live freely. Thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed exploring these intriguing cold cases with me. If you found the video fascinating, don't forget to give it a thumbs up and subscribe to Cold Case Mystique for more deep dives into cold case investigations. Your support helps me bring you more compelling content. Leave a comment below with your thoughts or any cases you'd like me to cover next. See you in the next video. And remember, the search for truth never stops.